Welcome, everyone. It's good to see you all here in Zoom world. My name is Erica Cole Arenas. I'm the Faculty Director of Imagining America, and I'm also faculty in American Studies at the University of California, Davis. It is my honor to kick off this Imagining America study group, and it is especially my unique honor to introduce our guest scholar facilitator today, Leigh Patel, author of No Study Without Struggle, Confronting Settler Colonialism in Higher Education. We're really excited to have you all here to engage with us and with Leigh on this topic. The Imagining America study group was created this fall with the intention of building more intimate spaces for us to study together, to learn together, to build alliances, build peer networks in a slightly more engaged and intimate way than our larger webinars. It's also designed to bring some of the leading organizers and thinkers and partners in Imagining America's collective work, our study, our action, our research, into relationship with our members. We don't really have these opportunities to come together across the national network throughout the course of the year. So this space is really intended as a study group in a way. So fitting that we have you here with us, Leigh Patel, in a more intimate setting. In today's session, we'll do a few things. Leigh will set the stage and talk a little bit of the power of study and struggle and her own work. She will then be joined by 4 reflection partners who themselves are deeply engaged in activist scholarship and study and organizing and really deep work. After that point in time, you all will be invited to engage in the conversation. So that's pretty much it for today. And so without further ado, it's my honor to introduce Dr. Leigh Patel. Leigh is a interdisciplinary researcher, educator, and writer, and a professor of education at the University of Pittsburgh School of Education. She works extensively with societally marginalized youth and teacher activists. Patel is a recipient of the June Jordan Award for Scholarly Leadership and Poetic Bravery, and what a great award, award in poetic bravery, and is a board member of Education for Liberation, a longstanding organization dedicated to transformative education for and by youth of color. I just have to say, I have enjoyed your work so much in this book and beyond, and it's quite an honor that you're here to study with us. So I turn it over to you. The reflection partners will be introduced when we get to that point in time in the agenda. So Leigh, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Erica. Thank you so much to many other people who you actually won't see their names in the Zoom room. There's people on the back end running tech. There have been people who have been helping to get the word out to you who have been able to show up to this space, and people who haven't been able to show up to this space for whatever reasons. So there's, as we all know, there's a lot of hands lifting and a lot of different beings lifting. So my deep appreciation. I'm speaking to you today from the unceded territories of the Omaha peoples, part of the Woodlands, the Clans peoples who have been and have continued to be the stewards of the plains lands in the Midwest. And I'm also coming to you from my mother's basement, which I'm really gonna force somebody to make me leave, because it turns out I'm a much nicer person, even when I am working really long hours, if I get to hug my mother every day. So as Erica said, we're really going to be in a study group with each other. I'm going to kind of lay a little bit of a foundation. I read the materials that the study group engaged with last time. And if you're thinking like, oh, wasn't part of that, is fine. I'm just going to be making light references in case people were part of that study group and you're still thinking about some of those ideas. I'll connect across those. I'll talk a bit about why study groups have been going on for such a long time, and really what makes them different than a class, for example. What makes us different this evening than people who enroll in a degree program or who in a 7th grade course class and they really just don't like being there. What makes a study group different than all these other formal education spaces? And how do study groups even pop up in formal education spaces? I'll loop in some of the reasons why I recommended and asked if you had a chance to read Robin D.G. Kelly's opening essay to Black Study, Black Struggle, and listen to Miriam Kaba in conversation with Prentice Hemphill. And if you had a chance to read some of my work, that's wonderful and certainly not at all necessary. So let's talk about study groups for a few minutes. I'll keep this pretty short. I want to start with the materials that the study group organized by Imagining America, and I'm bringing in so many different people and their roles, and so many of you who are in these roles, you are educators, you're also designers, you're also artists. But in the previous study group, I was looking at the materials that you all engaged with. And there was one sentence that I kept returning to in like beautiful frameworks for transformation and change. And the sentence that I kept returning to was that we need to turn away from critique. I kept going back to it. And I think about the fifth or sixth time I returned to it, I realized like, oh, I keep going back to this sentence because I don't agree with it. And the reason I don't agree with it is really found in Robin Kelly's book, Freedom Dreams. And also what I've learned from listening to his sister. And that the foundation of Freedom Dreams, that book, and really more the act of dreaming freedom, involves having, if you will, I'm going to refer to 2 feet, knowing that we all might not have 2 feet, but I'm going to refer to 2 feet. That freedom dreaming involves having one foot firmly planted in a rigorous critique, in a rigorous acknowledgement of where knowledge systems have come from, who's been erased from those knowledge systems, like really studying hard what are the material conditions that are impacting life forms, and more so how these life forms interact with each other, how they're able to come together, or how they have been shorn apart, how their relationships have been severed. We have to critically engage with. So I'm not quite ready to turn from critique, but the reason I'm not ready to turn away from critique is because for me, I think the way I've been raised by Education for Liberation as an adult, and certainly the ways that I have continued to be raised by my mother, is that we need critique from a place of love in order to have another foot, if we have 2 feet, to have one foot in critique, looking at the material conditions that shape something as a problem, but what kind of problem? And the other foot then dreaming freedom into existence. That if we don't have these 2 anchors, if that works better for you, if we don't have these 2 anchors, these 2 sides of a bridge as we try to build it, we need the critique in order to imagine what it is that we're trying to be in a different relationship with, if we are in a not so great relationship with. So that's how I've been thinking also about study groups. I've been so fortunate to be in so many study groups, and it's been in conversation with people like the 4 really brilliant, generous people who are going to join soon as conversants, and then we'll open up more broadly, as Erica said. It's been through study groups that I've come to learn that a book can be a love letter. So if you'll bear with me, I'd like to just read a little bit to you about what I've been thinking about of how can a book be a love letter. So how I have come at this, and it really, it's my responsibility to thank Sarah Ahmed in anything that we do when we're thinking about universities and who gets to lodge a complaint and what happens to them, and welcoming to everybody who's in the chat, and really appreciating people saying where they're tuning in from. And thanks you so much for doing that. So looping in Sarah Ahmed's work, that really invites us to really know that raising a complaint and being in conversation, all of these things can be acts of love. They are acts of gratitude. So I'm understanding that a book can be a love letter that expresses love and gratitude. And how can this book, a book that I worked on, how can it be a love letter? Especially when people have asked me, but what solution do you have for education? You point out the settler colonialism and these roots, but what solution do you have? My answer is really simple, not to be confused with easy. My answer is study groups and loving learning more than property and profits. Increasingly, no, interestingly, excuse me, no one ever asked me what the solution to settler colonialism is. They just asked me what the solution to the troubles in higher education is. So in the book, I thank a number of people and collectives, including this collective that's in formation. And this love and gratitude letter is something different. It pulls back the cover of the work lovingly told in the book, work that cannot be contained within any single text, movement, or moment. So instead of, doing PowerPoint slides, I would just like to point out some of the love here. I've come to learn that words like confronting and study and struggle can be words of love. Even though they're commonly understood to be hard words of discord, aren't these words of strain? Aren't these maybe difficult conversations? How do we prepare for difficult conversations? Yes and no. These are words of striving, of dreaming, of collective, of refusal, of release. I must thank these words specifically and marshal them for the larger love of learning. A collective love for learning that is so big, we have to talk about settler colonialism, not as an event, but an ongoing set of actions and relationships more than fixed positions. We have to talk about this in order to understand it, in order to stand our relationship to it. But it is an all too common distraction for so many. We also have to not let us distract us from freedom dreaming. I want to thank every sociolinguistic who has reminded us that no word or phrase is inherently difficult. There are no inherently difficult conversations. It's how they are framed. And the way that we operationalize them is really about power and flow. We make it difficult through our evasions of how we got to this place of an empire eating itself. This is a love and gratitude letter for every Native person who is asked after they have taught uninvited guests about the relationship to land that preceded them and given them temporary welcome. After doing that, they are often asked, as Eve Tuck has written about, for honey-do lists for what can white and arriving settlers do to not feel so badly about being white and arriving settlers. And stretching the deep relations among living beings, even as some of us try to actually repair and be in relation. What do we do with that? We learn more, we read more with others, and act from knowledge and humility. We act collectively for rematriation and reparations. If you don't know what rematriation is, I want to preemptively thank you for finding some friends and for finding some texts and getting together and study what rematriation is so that you can move into practice. I want to thank every collective fighting for the active destruction of voter rights laws. I want to thank them for knowing that the repeal of voter rights laws, the use of law telling women again that their bodies are not theirs. I want to thank them for knowing that these laws and bills banning kindergartners from reading critical race theory, that they're all connected. Thank you for not falling for the hustle of endlessly arguing on some cable news channel about what CRT is. If you do not know that history in life, Amber Ruffin has it defined for you. If you want, you can read Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz's work as well. So I really want to thank study groups that get into study, not just to define something, but to be with an idea. So what is higher education? In a nation whose DNA is settler colonialism, and what does this have to do with love? Well, as usual, somebody else that I know and was able to work with for a while said it really well. They would come around to my campus office on the days that I would be there, because they knew that I would only be there on the days that I was teaching. They would come around to my campus and sit down. This one day they came around, they sat down in this chair and they said, Patel, and they shook their head. And on that chilly January day, after they said Patel and shook their head and rolled their eyes, they said, there is 1 week. There is 1 week where we are supposed to read a few articles written by Black scholars. This course starts with John Dewey. This tells me that this course doesn't know who I am, doesn't want to know, and is satisfied with starting educational research with one white man and inserting its 1 week of, air quotes, diversity. Knowledge is behind paywalls. except we know that some of the most catalytic knowledge is not behind paywalls. In fact, can't be, as Laura Harjo, who will join us in conversation, writes so beautifully, can't actually meet the paper of the academia. We are catalyzed by so many ways of knowing that come from social movements, that come from communities that don't fit into the way that universities so often say, well, like, what are we doing with the community? How do we engage the community? Community is a vibrant, unruly force that can't be forced into that definition. And we are paying attention to these complaints, these disruptions. That's also what a study group does, is it comes out of some kind of unrest. It comes together out of some kind of unrest. And it does that not to wave around a diploma, not to say like, look at all the things that we've read. It doesn't do it to get a grade. Study groups come together because they want to change something and because they want to practice with each other. And here I'm also leaning on practice, not as a way of like getting ready for something, but doing something over and over and over again, being in relation again and again, continuously, as a practice of fidelity. The study groups emerge out of something that I believe to be so much core about learning that too often formalized education kind of gets in the way of. So I'm going to close this love letter to learning itself. The legendary poet Lucille Clifton asks in her poem, Won't You Come Celebrate With Me? This prophetic poem. She tells us that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. For centuries, settler colonialism has been trying to kill Native peoples and their relations, and it has failed. For centuries, anti-Black racism has been attempting to collapse Black people into fungible chattel property. It's still been trying to do that, and it has failed to do this. For centuries, it has been trying to tell us that there are binaries of sexuality and binaries of gender, and it has failed. For centuries, it has been trying to tell brown people that they are coolie labor and that migrant women are subject only to how their bodies are read, and it has failed. Has it left some bruises? Has it taken lives? Absolutely, it has. But as an overarching project, it has not failed, because here we are today, gathering together, learning, and being in relation. I'm going to tell you the last thing that I write in this book, and it's not a spoiler alert, it's actually just a coda. It's my invitation. In light of my critiques of formal education, including higher education, I'm sometimes asked why I work within them. The answer is a simple one. I love learning. I love that it is hard. I love that it is destabilizing. In its most transformative ways, it demands us to literally be different with ourselves, each other, all forms of life, present and coming. Most fundamentally, I just refuse to concede the catalytic power of study and learning to something so small as settler colonialism. So, with that, about study groups and how they come together, and a little bit of my love letter. Thank you so much for indulging me and letting me read a bit of that love letter that I really just have come to learn, like, oh, this book is a love letter. With that, I'm going to hand back over to Erica, who will invite four really brilliant and generous people to be in conversation.
Beautiful. Thank you, Leigh. I could listen to this letter and your stories forever. Beautiful. What a joy to be in this study group together. So if Cal, Rana, Laura, and Gail could turn your videos on and maybe give a wave or something so people can see you as well, that would be great. And I'm excited to introduce you to join Leigh in conversation in no particular order other than the cut and paste into my document. So eager to welcome you to the space. And then maybe when I call your name, your names are right there, so no need. Dr. Gail Greenlee is an independent scholar whose work sits at the intersection of Black and Latinx girlhood studies, geography, and children's literature. A former ACLS Emerging Voices Fellow in the Department of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies at Ohio State University, Gail now serves as a consultant on one of our Imagining America research initiatives, looking at graduate student experiences in public scholarship, community engaged work, and scholar activism. And I'll also say Gail was a co-director of our Page Fellows program and also an alumni of that program. So welcome, Gail. Rana M. Jalil is an associate professor in gender, sexuality, and women's studies and chair of the Cultural Studies Graduate Group at the University of California, Davis. Welcome, Rana. Her first book, The Work of Rape, received the 2021 Author of Color First Book Award from Duke University Press. Congratulations, Rana. That's very exciting. A longtime member of the American Association of University Professors, she presently serves on Committee A, the Committee on Academic Freedom and Tenure. Laura Harjo, welcome, Laura. Laura is a Muskogee scholar and an associate professor teaching Indigenous planning, community development, and Indigenous feminisms at the University of Oklahoma. Harjo's research and teaching centers on imbuing complexity into Indigenous space and place, missing and murdered Indigenous women and relatives, and anti-violence, and community-based knowledge production. She's the author of Spiral to the Stars, another beautiful book, Muskogee Tools of Futurity, from University of Arizona Press 2019, which employs Muskogee epistemologies and Indigenous feminisms to grapple with the community practices of futurity. Laura is also on Imagining America's National Advisory Board. So thank you and welcome, Laura. And last but not least, Cal Alston, my friend and colleague and co-conspirator, is a professor in Cultural Foundations of Education and in Women and Gender Studies at Syracuse University. She's an associate dean for academic programs in the School of Education and previously served as a senior associate provost and senior vice president. She's also the chair of Imagining America's National Advisory Board, and so many other things to say about Cal, but welcome to all of you. I look forward to listening to your dialogue. They will engage with one another for, we'll keep it flexible, 20 to 30 minutes or so, and then we welcome the rest of you to join the conversation. In the meantime, we like to consider the chat our community forum, so feel free to participate throughout by adding comments, questions, resources, etc. Throughout the conversation. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being in conversation with each other and with me. Thank you so much for joining. What do you want to talk about?
I'm gonna just jump in just because these things the beginnings are always awkward. So, I would just be really interested in how you came to this project and how and why you decided to write it, just as maybe an opening for some of these other questions about study and love.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, I think somewhat similar, and of course I welcome the dissimilar as well. Somewhat similar to much of the work that I know of each of you for individuals in the work that you do in relationship with other people. I think that's one of the things to know about all of you as well, that your work is in relation with other living beings. It's constantly in relation and thinking about what are the conditions and what are the relations. So I came to think about study and struggle, and I decided, like, okay, I guess I'm going to write something about higher education because it needs to reckon with its DNA in settler colonialism, and not as a starting point, but as an ongoing thing. I did, and Cal and I mentioned this before we opened up the room to everybody else. So having been particularly in a leadership position in a university that had this decidedly not diversity and equity or diversity and inclusion title. I wasn't a DEI officer. I don't want to be an officer ever of anything. And I definitely don't want to be an executive, like chief diversity officers. I think a lot of people are chief diversity officers. I think, like, wow, those are three really complicated words. And then you put them all together. Yeesh. So I think it came from that. And also, like, I've also been really fortunate to be in lots of spaces that have horizontal ways of leadership. And so also to say there are other ways that we can do this. There are other things that we actually don't have to let the university own, or including land, but definitely relation. And I guess that to kind of loop back around, like I often say to when I'm working with people who are in graduate programs and they're really struggling because they feel that they have to leave their family and their ways of knowing, that may include their related family but family of many kinds. They have to leave all of that. And I just say, like, for me, I cite my mother. So whatever it is that you need to cite that. And if you need to not cite it because higher education doesn't get to know that about you, then keep it hidden. So I think that's what led me to write this book, and kind of have both a like, stop sucking up all the oxygen, and let's stop letting it distract us. Let's take the things, let's still back the things. Barbara Ransby writes in that series, Black Study, Black Struggle, about stealing from the university. And I always want to add, like, stealing back from the university. Like, let's steal back as much as we can. Let's not cede our power to it. Thanks for getting us started, Rana. Thanks for that really beautiful, really generous question.
You mentioned about holding on to power, your power, not the. And I think I've been struggling, maybe not studying enough, but struggling with how to do that without being corrupted. I mean, it's very the other folks who are in this conversation and yourself are all at least one generation behind me in age, certainly not in wisdom, but in age. And so I feel like there's a cyclical space of trying to figure out how to move things forward. And at various points, I will confess to having, I think, been corrupted by the university's insistence on a certain form of study. And recently, I've just been provoked into a cycle of memory that I want to say is maybe a form of study in itself, that is just seeing those memories in a new phase, with new vision, and the opportunity to talk to people who were not there at that origin moment, but have been there in the cycles that have come after it. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about that, the role of memory and struggle and power, and that set of relations that really, I guess, have been provoking me recently.
Well, I'm going to say just two quick things. Because I really want to hear from, like, I'm thinking, Gail, I thought first of you, I'm like, well, you liberated yourself from this thing. So I really want to hear what that path has been. And Laura and Rana, you both also, and Kelly, you as well, like you, all of you definitely make such deliberate decisions from my study of your work, like swimming around in your work. You make deliberate decisions about how you're going to be. Like, what is it that we should constantly be thinking about? And what is it that we can even learn from? Some of my colleagues have been, Sabina Vaught and Elon Dancy have been proposing to us to think about, were the strikes the portal? Actually, was that actually the rupture, the upending of work as it's commonly known? So Cal, I'll just offer, your words remind me of Cynthia Dillard's work, and remembering and darkened knowledge, and really remembering what we've been made to forget. And then I have to, I feel compelled to mention Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who has been teaching us for so long that the decolonial is always present in the colonial. And La Paperson has written so beautifully about that, in a third university is possible. And I struggle with that as well. I'm like, is it? I don't know, but I'm going to try to do some things with the resources it has. But again, like, I think all of you have intention. And I'd love to hear about the intention that you have about your relation with and beyond higher education.
I'll jump in because Leigh, I read the chapter and I was really struck by that last line, which, you know, part of it you read as part of your Coda, because I think it encapsulates a struggle that is ongoing with me, because I absolutely love the process of learning. I love the exchange of ideas and being in conversation with people, whether it's in the academy or outside of the academy. And for everyone on the call, I actually was a grad student. I got my PhD at UNC Chapel Hill. So if you read the Robin D.G. Kelly essay, UNC figures in that, and it just brought back so many memories of that time, the protest around Silent Sam statue, the protests of Black students, grad and undergrad, to really push for certain demands. And one of the things that he wrote in that essay was about the political stance or orientation of students, some being radical, some not being radical, some not being political, and just really have their minds towards professionalization. And speaking personally, and for thinking of some other friends of mine, I know many of us who are radical and progressive in our thinking, but had absolutely given up on the institution and were ready to leave because of the amount of harm that we had experienced, or those close to us in departments and then different entities on campus had experienced in the process. And so I was really experiencing a pull away from that space, even though I'm a 3-time UNC grad, bachelor's, master's, and PhD from that institution. So I don't know if I have liberated myself. There's always a pull. I have been part of an independent study group, 2 other women of color. We were brought together by a professor who saw a call for essays about feminist pedagogy by women of color. And she thought that we might be able to create something. And in the process of writing something, it became less about creating this essay for publication and more about the community that we were creating ourselves. And we were constantly thinking about this rupture that was happening in the academy at that particular time, and what was our role. And we were thinking about palliative care, and is there a way in which we function to move the institution that is dying in many ways, is, you know, corroding right before us or decaying right before us, moving it to a new life and a new form and a new way of being and interaction. But even in that process, and I can say that the 3 of us have been meeting and working with one another and studying deeply with one another outside of UNC for several years now, going on maybe 6, almost 7 years. And there's still this sense that the academy is not able to change. And I hate to say that, but there's this kind of pessimism about the space that I still grapple with.
Scale.
So I guess I'll throw this back to everyone, because this is making me think. You submitted some questions to us about study as an experience or expression of love. And I had to rack my brain to try and remember, you're thinking about memory, Kyle, a time where I felt that kind of expression of love, and it's not situated in higher ed necessarily, not the PhD program, definitely in elementary school. And more recently, I was working with African American Policy Forum, and they had a young scholars program. So we were working with young Black girls and women from high school to college, and they were doing research out of their own experiences. And aside from the structures of the university and critiquing that institution, critiquing what's happening in their public school system, et cetera. And so it was really exciting and it was really beautiful. It's led by Dr. Venus Evans Winters, and that absolutely was a space that I think was dedicated and rooted in love for Black girls in particular and Black people more broadly. So where is love in this for y'all, if at all?
Well, I already spoke, so I want to give Laura and Rana a chance to speak first.
Well, I think in my own work, that's probably central to everything that I'm doing. And I usually say that if I didn't feel like I had this relational accountability to my natal community, there would be no reason for me to be in the academy, because I very much see it as, I guess, a white supremacist institution, but it has a lot of resources. So like, there's no reason for me to be there other than to figure out how to channel resources to my community, how to like relate to other scholars that have frameworks maybe that we can share and use. But, you know, in the chapter, I forgot which, let's see, there's a quote that Leigh has about not, I often tell my students that they should not seek love from the institutions that hire them or charge them tuition. So when I think about that, like, the love isn't situated with the university, it's with community. And so like in my own writing, I think when I talk about sovereignty, I don't talk about it in the same typical way of like governance and political systems. I talk about it in terms of kinship and relating to one another. And those are the sorts of things that I think, like around Indigenous feminisms and some of the things that have driven me into either participating in a study group or creating a study group. So when I was at UNM and I was teaching planning, a lot of my students, most of my students were Indigenous. We had a lot of Indigenous students. We also had a lot of students from Hispano communities. So acequia, kind of like land grant communities, and they couldn't see themselves in the scholarship. So where there was this gap, then they still wanted to know, like, well, how do we do this kind of community work in our own communities? Like, why, we don't even see ourselves in this writing. And from that, we kind of formed this Indigenous feminist planning group where we would just like make stuff together and talk and maybe read a Leanne Simpson article, but it was less about like, we're going to like really pick apart this for arguments, but it was also about building relationships with one another. So it was about study, but it was about like that notion of, that I write about in my own work, of radical sovereignty or Stajati sovereignty, this kind of sovereignty that happens, that you can shape your own community if you have the kinship relations there. And at the center of that, then, of creating the kind of futures that you want to see for your community, it is rooted in love. So, I mean, I guess that's how I think about love, with study groups and in the work.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I think it's my turn, so I'm just gonna go to keep it going. I think as much about, for me, it's as much about just being disgruntled on all sorts of levels as it is about love, and maybe there's love at the bottom of that or something. But I find I find like the idea of study that I think I follow a lot is Eli Meyerhoff's and Beyond Education, which is study means to pay close attention to something. So it's a way of staying in relation, and it's a way of staying in touch with, I think, how you move through the world. So for me, higher ed has not ever been that's central to my, I guess, it's only been really central to, like, I feel like how I live my life since I moved from California to the East Coast, because there's it kind of forces, these jobs kind of force you sometimes to dislocate yourself from things. They put you out of relation to everything you've known. And the way that I think about study in relation to that dislocation is just thinking about engaging at all sorts of different levels. So I do work with formerly incarcerated people to help people who are still on the inside get parole. So that's been an education and study. That's been educational and study, and it's been a side of study for me personally, where that's not something that's super well funded. It's very grassroots, but it can feed into the work that I do in the university, in these spaces that are definitely fraught, right? Definitely fraught, definitely compromised, definitely corrupted. Because I'm in gender studies classes, and critical ethnic studies, and those kind of spaces. So there is space to talk about it with students and open up their ability to see that you can do all sorts of things from all sorts of positions. So you can kind of work across. You can, maybe it's just a way of thinking about. Maybe it's a way of thinking about theft. Maybe it's a way of thieving from the university. But I always get a little confused about when theft, benefits the university too, right? Because the classes that I offer can get taken up as evidence that something is happening here that isn't happening here, for example, or isn't happening here in any really sustained structural way. So I find, but I find working kind of across as many different institutional or grassroots levels I can, it keeps me unsettled enough, or it keeps me unsettled, and I feel like that's a good thing, even if it's not always a comfortable thing. I don't know if that was like the best answer to that question, but it was probably the most honest one I have right now.
I just wanted to, I'm sorry. Gail?
I just wanted to say something about art before you come back in and mush us together, I think. Is that, because I've been in the administrative life for such a long time in the academy, I just continue to see it as making it so that Gail has to feel, that giving up is the only solution. I think that's the motive of the university, to keep people satisfied that there's progress when there is no progress. I was just going to think of two situations of study. I don't know that I'd call them study groups per se, but working with a sort of a model of an arts-based freedom summer school for middle school aged kids a couple summers ago was really transformative for me, because it reminded me that art was one way of making a different language. And our whole purpose was to get them sort of obliquely and slyly to be able to make more demands and ask more questions of their own schooling when they went back to school, to give them an experience of study and learning that wasn't based in the curriculum that they were likely to encounter in their schools when they went back. And this past school year, I was asked to be a consultant on a play in the drama department. And I was a drama major back in the dawn of time. And it was just my encounters with those students where we were working with a text that was not our text. It was a text from someone else, but we were working through that and really asking questions of each other across generations was also a space where the university fell away in a way that made sense to me and made me feel more satisfied than I think I've felt in a long time when I do my regular day job. But I just wanted to throw that in before you came back in, Leigh.
Yeah, um I really hope you like Gail, I really appreciate, like, I'm not sure I would call it that I liberated myself. I really appreciate, like, let me kind of say what I think it might be. And I also appreciate I appreciate, like, when there's pauses, like sometimes we just start sitting and thinking about things, or sometimes we're just like, we're distracted by something. I'm also thinking about how, Rana, what you were talking about made me think about, I will be forever indebted to Harney and Moten's book, The Undercommons, and chapter 2 in their Undercommons is one that I like to read a lot with other people, or think about with other people. We don't have to read it necessarily, but think about some of the ideas. And one of those ideas is like the university's need for critical scholars to say, like, look, see, we have that person who's disgruntled over there. And so that's our critical scholar. And they've been awarded this, their book was awarded this amazing award. And your book is amazing and should have all the awards, like whatever, but I think like the pushback on the university is like, you don't get to claim that. And so how is it that we, Cal, you raise up this question of like, how is it that we skirt that the university claiming us as optics, as how it wants to frame that it is making progress, and progress is such a fraught word. It is such a linear, really, I think, harmful word. I think it's a really harmful word because it doesn't allow enough breathing space. One of the things I think a lot about, because my field where I get my paycheck from in the University of Pittsburgh is the field of education. And I mourn every time we don't make space of learning from our mistakes, that gets shrouded, and people feel shame because they've made a mistake. And I just think, wow, we just keep getting this wrong, because when we are unsettled, as you said, Rana, or Laura, as you said, if we're not actually working from love, then we know, like, oh, okay, well, I need to not be in this space anymore, because if I can't serve the love, the community, the relations that I'm with, that I'm part of, and I have answerability to, then I need to leave. I need to find where I can do that. And I'm thinking about the ways that Sandy Grande has also written about putting universities into hospice care, in essence, as you were speaking about palliative care, I believe, Gail. So those things are all coming together for me under, like, well, not under, but somehow next to, in relationship with, how is it that we are in relation with this entity that is higher education? I appreciate all of you speaking on that. But it really lit up for me, like, oh, thank goodness Harney and Moten wrote some things about how universities really, really, really need critical scholars. They need that, they want that, but they don't want too much of it. And they definitely don't want it to start organizing itself within those spaces. They definitely don't want it to start talking with other entities that actually might not ever call themselves critical or not understand themselves that way. So it really depends on that. Not so dissimilar from K-12, it really depends on that isolation aspect. So every time we rupture that, I think that's a thieving that I really appreciate, because I feel like, well, you can't try to co-opt that. And I think that's something else that I'll just say, and then I'll mute myself because that is really the best way for me to stop talking, is I think it's worthwhile for us, at least for me, it's worthwhile for me to give breath to um, the nonsense speech, like the speech that doesn't make any sense that universities say. Like it, we had to talk about this responsibility centered budget model, which in essence basically means like you have to raise all your own money and you're going to start at a deficit and everybody's in competition with each other. And I guess we're still in the year of anti-racism. I'm not sure. There were all these letters written by provosts and vice presidents and presidents, and I think a lot of them, obviously not UCal, but I think a lot of them like were writing, okay, anti-Black racism for the first time. And so like turn to likely a Black staff member and say like, okay, I capitalized the B in here, okay, but not the A. Okay, anti-Black racism. And then turn to a campus letter that was going out to everybody about reopening their campuses and what hourly wage workers needed to be there in order for those campuses to even open up. So I know that was a very wandering set of comments, and this is why it's really good that I mute myself. But that's just somewhere reflecting back to you from what all of you offered.
I'm just looking at the chat and I'm seeing Sylvia Gale's comment about trying to turn formal classes into study groups for a long time and realizing that this will always fail. And I feel that that has been a similar approach that I've taken when teaching in the academy, because I do come from a community-based literacy programming background and adult ESOL education. And I think a more egalitarian way of, having group discussions and not having so much of a hierarchy. I'm not a fan of grades, but I know that the institution requires that, most institutions do. And I try to operate as much as possible, or at least orient students to the classroom in a way that where they're not thinking about the grade as the end result or the outcome of the product of this class. This is not what you're going to get. This is the process that we're most interested in. But Sylvia, I'm just saying all this to say that I'm sitting with that. If that effort of mine was and will always be, if I find myself in the academy again, a futile one.
Sylvia, I was also thinking about your comment. Thanks so much for putting that in there. Christina and Maya, thank you, and Maya as well. But Sylvia, speaking to this, I think about how study groups can emerge within formal spaces. But I kind of paraphrasing Adrienne Marie Brown, who said like, we won't all leave together. And Adrienne Marie Brown was referring to like this white supremacist project. We won't all leave it at the same time, but we won't leave it alone. And that really resonates with me with how like study groups might bubble up within core spaces. I find it almost impossible to think like, okay, we're all going to be a study group now. I mean, we'll see how it goes. Maybe some of us will get to just sit next to each other and relate with some ideas and ways of knowing. We'll see how it goes. But I think expecting that to happen and for an entire class, whatever that might be, I don't know, it could be 4 people, it could be 53, I'm not sure. I think it's hard to know until we actually come together how it will go. And even then we have to always be paying attention to coordinates.
Just as promised, a little reminder, we are close to the top of the hour, which was the point in which we might want to open up the conversation with Gail and Sylvia. You already graciously have done. So just the nod to the time that Leigh, if you wanted to invite other questions, comments, or discussants into the conversation. please do. And I know you wanted to do breakouts too, but I'll leave it to you in terms of open discussion, et cetera, versus breakout, et cetera. So just noting the time. Such a great
Leave
conversation.
it to me to decide.
Yes. Or all of you in discussion here with one another.
Well, I'll definitely share what I think, and then I honestly, like, these are some amazing designers of spaces, and these are people who are practiced at being in relation and practice of, like, oh, that relation didn't feel so good right there. I wasn't really honoring what that relation. So I really invite some listening, and I really would like to hear from you all. So I think it would be great for people to have a chance to talk with each other. I definitely talked for too long at the start and still. So I think that would be wonderful. I also really want to privilege, like, in these minutes and maybe after we go into some small breakout groups, like coming back together. So what surfaced up in the smaller spaces in your conversations? What questions, what, like, learning edge did you hit you didn't know you had, or comfort, like, what got unsettled that has been unsettled? So that's my idea. Like, yeah, let's do that. I'd love to hear from really these amazing designers and thinkers about space and practitioners. See, y'all go, just go quiet. I'm cool with
Is it
it.
okay if I kind of share some reflections from the chapter from your book, that what it sort of prompted with me? So what I really liked about it, kind of going into community education type spaces, and it had me thinking about like freedom schools, sovereignty schools, and yeah, those are the things that like really get me going, like that maybe people in my community, because of structural racism, they don't have the ability to enter into higher education spaces. It's like the same story of like when I was in high school, they put all of the Native American students on the you're just going to graduate plan, not on the college prep. So, I have these really like smart folks in my community that, like, I love the idea of figuring out spaces where they can get together and converse and sort things through. But on the other hand, I'm also thinking about how there aren't a lot of Native American writers within our community conveying knowledge that kind of way. So like they're producing knowledge in their own ways. So how do you kind of form the kind of study groups where people are producing knowledge on their own terms, they're sharing on their own terms? And yeah, so that, like, in terms of stopping and pausing and thinking and how this is kind of surfacing memories, I've been away from my natal community since 2005 when I went to USC for graduate school. And I just kind of made it back to OU like last year on like whatever, like research and making it land with home. So I've been able to like have a lot of conversations with my mom, who is an elder in the community, and kind of this idea of creating this group called Muskogee Memory Workers, and like having Muskogee elders convening and doing whatever they do, if that's like making a quilt together, but then having conversations of how do we put our own thumbprint on these settler colonial symbols within our town these are like the points of how the spaces get memorialized. Like, I don't know, like we have this kind of stereotypical chief that is like the local school mascot, and it's supposed to be kind of to honor who the town was founded after. He was not a chief, but the local white folks started calling him chief, fill in the blank. So it's kind of like how then can they disrupt this space on their own terms? And I was talking to her and she was kind of passing it on to them of like maybe organizing something that it's like maybe they're creating their own map biographies and we're making murals, like maps to murals, and they're memorializing their space. So then it's like they're studying, but they're writing too on their own terms. Maybe that's through art or through murals or through maps. And so like just from reading that, that's sort of like what it surfaced for me and kind of like reminded me of, again, my relational accountability to my community. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Laura. So beautiful. I'm not going to ruin it with more words.
The word that Rana said that really just, I think, is so descriptive of how I feel right now is disgruntled. I wrote that down in big letters and I'm going to go back to it. Because I've been thinking just in the recent couple weeks, as we're trying to do a reform effort in my school of ed, and I alternate between being, impressed by some people and just completely thinking this is going to be a year's worth of effort that I'm going to put in, and I'm going to be so sad when it's done because it won't be done. But that this thinking about going back to, I don't know if it's really even Illich's words, but deschooling society, that we've just built these things up so that they're so dependent on capital and they're so dependent on white supremacy. They're so dependent on these systems that can not actually be dismantled. I think, if it's in palliative hospice and palliative care, sure, except that what I've seen in my time is that these institutions are very, very hard to destroy. Sure, they can decay, they can be disrupted, but in the end, they're very hegemony is very real. So I'm just, I maybe if I ask Rana if she has a view of what that disgruntlement that she's feeling, do you think it could generate? Do you think that's a generative disgruntlement, I guess?
Yeah, I think it is, because I get disgruntled about everything. Like it's just like it's grassroots organizing is incredibly generative, and being in community with people and in good relations with people is great, but it's hard work. So maybe I'm a little bit of an introvert, so that's hard. And then institutional work is hard because it's the institution. And then professional, like something like the AAUP is hard because it's it's both anti and in the institution in different ways, and you're just kind of dealing with a lot of different people at all times, right? So I think about Audre Lorde's idea about the house of difference all the time. And so that's part of what, so I kind of that, and maybe it's just my personality, but when people, I like the idea of love, but I find if I go into that, I excuse more. That's just, where I fall. But if I kind of stay a little bit, I guess a little bit on edge, and I think about what it means to move across different scales and different places so that the work isn't, just concentrated and it's like in a single mode or in a single place, then that helps me. But, that's just, I guess that's just like how I worked it out. I think there are a lot of different, ways to work it out. And I think if you're in, I think also like if I were on the East Coast still, I might have a different set of, I would probably have a different answer because I would be in a different set of relationships, and I would be in some relationships that were, more long-standing and deeper than the ones that I have in California, which is still a very strange place to me. So that's my, I guess that's how I would think about it. But I also think like one of the things that's great about the university is that you can do, and this is like the university, like at the end, by that I mean like taking things out of it, right? Like it's there's so many parts to it, and the parts don't harmonize. And so you can find spaces where you can get I think you can find some spaces where you can reappropriate resources or do work that helps. And also, to go back to Maya's question, like how do you know when your labor is being exploited? I mean, I just think like we're under global racial capitalism. It's always exploited. So it's just like a question of figuring out how you can make it have multiple meanings or valences, right? So like it's going to benefit the university if I I write a book, it's critical. I think it's like it has like investments against the university and the state itself, but it's still a book that their faculty wrote, in some ways. And I don't have a lot of control over what that means, but I can think about who I talk to about it. And I can think about what kinds of organizing work I do that'll come out of that, or what kinds of future writing I do that comes out of that maybe doesn't always get captured. So like stuff can, I guess just to make a really obvious point, like things can have multiple effects that you do. And I think just kind of being comfortable with that is important. And that's also why I'm disgruntled, because like, of course I want it to have one effect and one particular effect, but it's not going to. So.
Gail, do you have something burning inside of you right now? And that's not like I see something burning. It's like a genuine question.
No, this is all just making me think again about the academy. And I think the life-giving part for me has always resided outside of it, or within smaller communities in the institution. I'm loving the references to Audre Lorde and Lucille Clifton, and thinking about the ways, because I'm a lit person, thinking about the ways in which Octavia Butler is now having, she's just risen to public consciousness in a way that I don't think she has before. And everyone's talking about imagining new futures. And this is something that, Afrofuturists and literary scholars and just creative writers, I'm thinking Black writers and speculative fiction in particular, have been thinking about for a long time. And I see so much. I also have a background in public library work. So to me, books are life-giving. What you were saying earlier, books can be love letters. And I think taking some of those resources, some of those readings that we love that are liberatory, and having reading circles in community spaces can be incredibly valuable, whether it's with young people or community neighborhood associations. I've just seen so many iterations of it and different readings of the work. And then some that I've been seeing online too. There's a whole webinar series called Octavia Tried to Tell Us. And I've been able to participate every once in a while. Those have been very rich conversations with people zooming in from literally all over the world. And that's not, the only forum like that I'm seeing. So those things have been generative spaces, I think, for me.
Thank you all so much. I think it's really good for us to, there's so many other folks here. And so I think it's really good for us to, these are like such beautiful openings that we have, like openings and ways of thinking. So what if we go into small groups for about 10 minutes and then come back with what surfaced in those and other things that the five of us have been percolating up and haven't spoken yet. How does that sound? Cool. All right. We'll see you. I'll see you back in 10 minutes. Thanks, everybody. Is this like one of the best / worst things of breakout groups? It's like, blah, 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 blah. It's just "Ooh, what were you gonna say? What were you gonna say?" So I'd actually love to know, like, what were people like in the middle of saying as people start to come back in. And
I just was gonna say, hey, Cal. How you doing? I haven't seen Cal in a while, so I just wanted to use the shout out, man. Hey, how you doing? Good to see you.
right, it's really sometimes good to just be with each other. Sometimes that's really enough to just be with each other. So I do want to we've got some minutes, and I would like to see if there's anything that other folks want to share or lift up, question. And if not, it's really okay just to be with each other. And we don't have to refer to a text. We can just be with each other. That's a really beautiful thing, not to be making widgets.
Well, I promised
she's
my
really-
group some. Oh, go
Yeah.
ahead. Sorry, did I cut
Oh,
somebody
I
off?
was gonna pass it back to you, Maya. I was gonna say if she's willing, I'd love to hear the end of Maya's thought.
Well, the first thing I did was confess to my group that I hacked my way in here. I teach high school. I haven't been in college in a long time. And then I ranted in my group about how much I don't really like university spaces because I teach at Los Angeles Unified from 8 to 3. And coming here is very jarring. It reminds me of when I called an ambulance once. I was at the county hospital for a couple hours and then I got transferred to Kaiser Permanente. And that day was really, really disarming. And I'm experiencing a similar sense of dislocation in that these are conversations that do not touch the first 13 years of the educational journeys of the students I serve. And many of them don't continue. Like education and a carceral school setting are so synonymous that they spend a lot of time and energy avoiding reading, avoiding talking about anything that's challenging, avoiding, anything that where they feel like, wow, these are, this is having to use my brain as a muscle. And then I was kind of challenged by my group around like, what are the actual concrete things then around, having this resource envy. And I figured I was like, I'm gonna send some very mean emails if I can't get in here. So to the comment in the chat, I think there's two things that come to mind. One is the Kelly idea of safety. And I was just saying that like I find the idea of safety within the university like really offensive. I went to a private liberal arts college. I went to Loyola Marymount, and they were safe spaces for a lot of folks to explore who they were and who they wanted to be. And I don't want to discount that at all. But I think that if you're looking at education as a whole, that notion of safety is always coming at someone's expense, right? It's coming at someone's exclusion. And I think that if it's safety based on exclusion, that's not, it's already based on a falsehood. And then the other thing I just wanted to name real clearly, as long as I'm being asked the question, is that these critical race theory battles that are happening, where are the college professors? I'm so mad. It's K through 12 educations, it's school boards, it's unions, but nobody in a high school sat down and pioneered critical race theory. So I feel like it's such a cop-out to give high school students, ethnic studies programs, this wealth of resources to help folks and in these communities understand the world they're living in, and then sit back and be like, oh, I'm so glad I'm not a high school teacher right now. Like, I find that so difficult to reckon with, is that it feels like a lot of K through 12, when we talk about education and we talk about the battles around education, we have two very distinct battles, but I would like to see some of this theory in practice. And I think for a lot of folks, it is going to mean that the actual theoreticians, right, who are using the big 4-syllable, $50,000 a year words are going to have to understand what is happening in the K through 12 setting. I think it's really important. So I guess what I'm asking is, while I hacked in here, please hack into some of our spaces. And bring your words, and most importantly, bring your theory, right? I'm reminded of the bell hooks quote, that she came to theory because she was hurting. And I think that has really transformed my journey as an educator, that it is that theory that allows you to understand it's not you, right? So it's a reference to Kelly. It takes it out of the personal and says, it's not you that's hurting. This is a hurtful system. And it's okay if you are in pain. There are others in pain and you need to find them. So that's sorry, that was a little longer than I wanted to say, but I appreciate being asked the question in the small group. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Maya. We do have a question from Ofelia Cuevas, and we only have about 2 minutes left, so I want to make sure to sneak that question in. And unmute.
Here I go. Thanks. Thanks, E. So 2 minutes left for the whole entire. Okay, well, I'm just gonna, you know, some of the earliest questions, you know, I do appreciate, you know, Erica folded me in and kind of brought me into IA very early on, that you know, we were talking in our breakout group about the, you know, the big conference in Chicago that had to do with incarceration, and it was kind of amazing. And I think it was this, you know, in some ways for me, an important moment of dealing with, and I just to give a little bit of background, but something I feel like should be brought up, like our relationship to higher education, you know, just, you know, I am, you know, the first person in my family, I'm 6th generation Mexican origin person, to go into higher ed at all. Like my family had absolutely no idea of what college even was or meant. They had a very good idea what jail and prison was because I have a lot of family that's been in and out of prison. But, you know, I think, you know, trying to talk about this in terms of actual emotions, which is, I usually avoid that, right? And thinking about love, which is hard because this institution in some ways is like almost broken me. And I have absolute like anger and hatred towards it and resentment, but and has really just broken my heart. I'll say it, if we're going to talk about love, it has absolutely broken my heart. And I feel like everyone else here having this kind of very strange relationship to higher ed and the university. But what I will say that still gives me hope, and I do kind of want to throw out there this thing when we talk about this as people of color and the things that we're dealing with, but you know, I really think oftentimes the issue of class gets overlooked, right? That there are many people of color in, you know, in very whatever, like programs, progressive lefty programs like ethnic studies or any of the other studies that overlooks that issue of class. And, you know, as much as my anger, my resentment, and the difficulties of trying to get through things, and I didn't go start my undergrad till I was 26 years old because I was a high school dropout and I really hated school. You know, what we face, I think, and I can just say this, if I can put this on the table, in many ways, and things have changed, and let's say in spaces like ethnic studies, and and the June Jordan Award, and congrats, because she was one of my profs at Cal. So during the time period where I do think things were transitioning very much so in higher ed in regards to things like ethnic studies, wasn't what it was before the 90s, but and I was there because I'm old, but you know, I think that I have to say there are things that, as difficult as this has been, not just as a person of color, but I will say as somebody that has real class issues of it. And I, you know, another part of my background, I am a public school person all the way through. Like undergrad was public. I was a UC kid all the way through. I have no idea what goes on in private schools, and I'm very thankful for that. But what I do hold on to, because I think that does train you differently. And if you have access to a private school, especially in higher ed, like Ivy Leagues, et cetera, your experience is very different. But I think the idea of publics and what is public and what we are still entitled to, because as much as my family has been incorporated or folded into, let's say, the California Department of Corrections, for instance, and the amount of money the state has spent on incarcerating my family, you know, me as the one person to kind of get through and be in a UC system, which is public. And when I started, Berkeley was like $500 a semester. there are ways that I see, you know, our relationship to higher ed, and it's hard for me, because not only am I disgruntled, I'm beyond disgruntled. It has broken my heart in so many, many ways. And I look at, when I say the public, I do mean belonging to the state. I do belong that it belongs to us. And I think that the way that I try to hold on to pursue what I'm doing, and Erica knows this because we're on the same campus, you know, by hook or crook and whatever circumstance, you know, I was able to build this, you know, university-wide initiative at UC Davis that deals with formerly incarcerated students. It's very different. It's another story, but she knows that I struggled with this. It was a deep struggle for me to all of a sudden be, oh, you're director of this now, university-wide entity. But there are things that I hold on to try to, I don't know, stay in love with it. I'm not sure. That I know are still there, right? That I know there are remnants, very far and few in between. One, because of what the state has done to, you know, the shift from the amount of material investment in the public school system. And I mean that all the way up to the UC system. The professionalization of what I've seen happen in places like ethnic studies, et cetera, and not just like the DEI kind of thing, but even in my own field, right? That are, to me, are, well, maybe disappointments. And again, this is a perspective more in relationship to class versus a person of color. The way that they've been incorporated in and then utilized. But I do think, because they're,
And Ophelia, I'm gonna jump in.
Go ahead. You can stop me.
No, it's okay. I was gonna say that we're about 5 minutes beyond time, and
No, I'll just stop. It's okay. It's cool, E. Don't worry about it.
What I was gonna say is your beautiful words and also the pressing struggles you're describing will be the pivot from which Leigh will close us out with any final thought or word.
Yeah, I'll try to not close so much as just add a little bit and thank everybody so much for showing up and for hacking in. Thank you so much for anybody who hacked in. I love that. What more fitting thing than hacking in? I'll just, Ophelia, I'm just gonna, because you were speaking, I just want to honor that as well. Like, it's incredibly important for us to know, like, when the UC system started charging tuition and why it started doing that. You know, there's such a close, it's well documented. Like, the Variant Baldwin has done really great work around this. I don't know if Dylan is still hacking in through somebody else's computer or not, but Dylan's done work on this as well. Lots of people have. That was a way to control the Black Panthers' work and to make sure it wasn't happening on campuses. So that's the surveillance. Like, it was like infused with the tuition in the UC campus system, yeah. Right? And so sure. I have no remedy for that, and I have no neat conclusion. I really want to pull back up, like the first question we had about love was about, like, when did you feel that? Didn't you feel like learning and love of learning, and was that ever in formal education? And then it's fine if it wasn't. So I think that's an all right place to kind of pause, where this collection of really wonderful spirits, minds, integrated people and their associated pets and other things around them have come today. Like, where was that for you? And if it wasn't there for you, it's really good for you to be like, why the hell wasn't that in there for me someplace? And if you stole it from me or broke it from me, I'm going to come back and haunt you, because you should not have done that. Or I'm going to make sure I go to this place where I can now find it.
Well, I think that's what I mean by it's still, like, I know that I'm still in a place where I still can think this belongs to me as not only as a 6th generation Mexican origin person, but as a, 4th generation Californian. I'm this place. I'm not from somewhere else. California And this school, my family has given whatever they've had on the, you know, it rests on the bones of the work and the labor of my family in California. I mean, even actual buildings in UC Santa Cruz, my family worked on, but it belongs to me and to us. I'm not going to speak to the rest of the geography or other class backgrounds, right? Because I can't, but the idea of a public, and again, before they can keep institutionalizing things like ethnic studies or looking at race or looking at, like I said, this place, this UC gave me here, now you can have this whole formerly incarcerated thing. You're the whole director of the university. I'm like, okay, well, shit, that it is, it belongs to us. And I mean, I'll just speak for my people. Again, Californians, working class, poor people, people who've never had parents don't have higher education, never even seen a private Ivy League campus. It belongs to us as much as they think the jail and the prison does, right? And in some ways, it's the only way I can hold on to this anymore is I will still demand that. But again, it is a perspective that, you know, I try to impart in students that have my same background. There's not a lot of them. There's definitely not a lot of professors that have the same background I do, but irregardless, I can't even go into details of what, in some ways, as much as it's broken my heart, has provided me when I go into, you know, a criminal court with my brother or my father or my cousins or whatever, right? I mean, some of my community work happens directly with my family. But it's there, you know, and somehow I guess maybe I did love it because it broke my heart. And sometimes it continues to break it, but I got here. I mean, it is less and less accessible, just like you said. I mean, I went to, if Berkeley was what it is now in terms of, I probably would have never went there. I mean, I was a high school dropout. I didn't have any money to get to Berkeley. I wouldn't be here right now if Berkeley wasn't what it, but I still believe it belongs to us as a public. And I'm, you know, trying to hold on to that. Maybe there's a little bit of love in that. I'm not sure. I got to figure out what that word means, but
I mean, they're there. And I'm sorry, Erica, I just love ending in a place of like, okay, yeah.
yeah, thanks, E.
Yeah.
Well, this conversation is, if anything, evidence that we need to keep doing this and doing this more frequently, and that we need a lot more time together. So I want to, first of all, thank you, Leigh, for joining us and leading us in this conversation. So deep, so thoughtful, and so much more to grapple with. I want to thank Cal and Gail and Rana and Laura. I'm still stewing on so much of what you said, as I know everyone is. Really thoughtful. The small group conversation is reflecting on all of your thoughts and words. I want to thank all of you who are participating, Maya, Ophelia, Sylvia, others who added to the conversation. I wish we had more time to start there and then continue on. But as a small token of Imagining America's appreciation and Leigh's appreciation, you will all receive a copy of No Study Without Struggle in the mail, a book for everybody who attended today. So thank you for joining us. I want to thank, you can't see them, but Papiro and Aaron, they're behind the scenes magic that always make the show run so smoothly. So thank you, Aaron and Papiro, and Christina and Cal for being my fierce partners on our research on upending, transforming, and maybe making public all education. So thank you, Cal and Christina. We'll be doing this about every month with a different provocateur. Our next is Christopher Long, who will talk about the Humetrics project and kind of transforming the way we see promotion and evaluation and things like that. So we'll have many more to come. And I just want to kind of formally mark the thanks and the ends, but if you want to hang on, we won't go anywhere. But we do have several East Coasters on the line, so I want to allow them to go get that rest or that glass of wine or whatever, since it is late their time. So thank you all so much. Always an honor to learn with you.
Thanks, E. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Aaron, everyone else.
Thanks.